So forgive me, I'm a little congested today, and this video is a little bit out of left field for my channel. But a couple years ago, I invested in a Kickstarter. I got caught up in this social media advertising around a particular device that promised to be both a game and a penetration testing tool, and a real nostalgia piece, if you will. It was a game that promised not to be like an internal game, but an external game, almost an augmented reality, a way to see more than the people around you were seeing, and access more than the people around you could access. And here we are, 2 years later, and I've got my Flipper Zero. Check it out. Yeah, cool. So this is Flipper Zero. This is the penetration tool Tamagotchi. And I mean, first impressions, I've had this for about a month now, but the build quality is really nice. Really great tactile buttons. You can hear just how nice that sounds. And it feels nice. It feels nice in the hand. It's a good weight. It's like a weight that says I've been nicely built and not not excessive weight, but it's also light enough that it travels very easily. Now this is, I think, more than the original Kickstarter was intended for. They made, I think, a lot more money than they expected, $2 million. And this device went from something that was probably going to be like 3D printed and hand produced out of a few hundred, maybe Raspberry Pi Picos, to a custom SoC, custom device design, custom mold injection, just a fully manufactured product. Again, yeah, feels really nice. They got the SD card reader. I have a 4 gig card in here, and even with a pretty reasonable amount of stuff on it, I don't even take up 1%. So I mean, I think you can take up to a 32 gig or maybe 64 gig, one of those two. But honestly, I can't see a practical value in that, unless maybe you're doing some sort of like heavy development or something, or you're interested in logging a lot of information for some reason. So that you that'd be more for like maybe very advanced users. But yeah, so I want to talk a little bit more about like kind of my experience with this device than go over the specifics of it. There's a few videos out there that can go over this, have gone over the specifics, and they can. And I guess that'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But the core of this device is that it is a reading and emulating device. Right, it has a bunch of built-in hardware, specifically so that you can read and then emulate various somewhat common signals. Has an NFC chip reader in the center here. I believe this is for the I buttons and things that I think this is just for the I buttons. I don't know. I haven't had a chance to test that out yet. There's an infrared blaster here, and then it can send sub-gigahertz and RFID. Some gigahertz signals that can read RFID. I don't know where the RFID chip reading element is, but yeah. So this is really intended. I mean, the game, right, is to capture as much data as you possibly can, right? Which is, a particular goal for some people, and the way to do that is to get in touch and contact with some of these devices and read their signals so that you can emulate them to their receptacle, right, where these signals are supposed to go to in order to create an action or a reaction. Now, what this relies on is you having a certain amount of access both to dongles, remotes, and whatever chips, right, or chipped devices, so that you can read them and then emulate them, right? If you were to just buy this and never plug it into your computer, which you can't do. You actually really need to upgrade the firmware on this device. But if this was selling with a 1.0 firmware, and you could conceivably not do anything to it, the game is to capture and to emulate. But again, that requires you to have devices that need that emulation. And some of these signals are maybe a little more or less useful to you depending on where you live and, I mean, frankly, what class stratosphere you live in, right? A lot of sub-gigahertz stuff is more modern IoT stuff. Some cars use it. Some garage door openers use it. There's various devices that use a sub-gigahertz stuff, but this is kind of higher end stuff. I mean, some of them are encrypted though. You're not going to be able to read and emulate like rolling key stuff, and you might actually break things doing that. Is my understanding. Again, I don't have that experience. I don't have any sub-gigahertz devices. Same with like RFID chips. I mean, a lot of times these are like key passes, so you can use these to get into buildings. To get into restricted areas, that are you've been granted access to, but you have to be around these things. You have to be in places that have restricted spaces, and you have to get the unique code for those particular things. This isn't something you can just go online and find. You're going to have to do a little bit of finagling, a little bit of work to acquire them. You're not going to be able to just walk up to something and just go, badoop, you're in. It's not that easy. NFC chips, I mean, these are in a lot of things now, a lot of credit cards, debit cards, Metro Fare cards, ID cards. You might find NFC in your smartphone for like payments. You're gonna find NFC chips in a few things. I saw somebody had an NFC chip in their Bluetooth speaker, like headphone charger. I don't really understand why that might be, but I mean this is, I think, probably one of the more common and modern use cases for this device, or an infrared. Right, so I mean, this is what I felt like this would be the most common, but when I look at it now, I actually got my friend a TV recently, and it was a TV from like 2012. I got it on Craigslist, and I pulled the remote out, and I was like, cool, I'm gonna take this remote and I'm gonna emulate it, and I went to go emulate, and I realized it's a Bluetooth remote, and I thought about it, and I was like, damn, well, I guess in the last like 10 years or so, Bluetooth has become the dominant. Infrared is an older technology, and I mean, granted, it might still be in use in a lot of different spaces. Some TVs, Roku's might turn on and off with using using the infrared. IRC, what am I talking about? But there's a lot less use cases for that than I would have expected, right? There's a lot of weird, I buttons. I don't have any I buttons. So if you don't have access to a lot of these things, if you don't have this kind of technology around you, and again, depending on what you do, where you are, this might not be super helpful. And in a practical sense, I mean, you might want to use a device like this on a day-to-day for your own personal use, right? As a tool to consolidate, right? If you have multiple ID badges that all use one of these various technologies, and you try to you want to consolidate all of them onto the device, right? There's been a lot of DIY solutions to some of these different signals for a while now, and people have been using them. This could be a really fun all-in-one kind of device for capturing it and condensing all your stuff into one place. But honestly, that's not always part of the rules, so you probably will get in trouble if you get caught doing something like that. People have been, gotten in trouble with their work and stuff. You're not really supposed to capture and emulate these things. Most of the time, they're intended to be some sort of security measure, right? And you're breaking that security by copying these. Also, this is, this is the device that is sold in the United States, and it's sold as a legal piece of hardware. So, technically, they can't sell you a device that allows you to do just anything. So if you are only using the firmware provided by Flipper Zero, uh, you are going to be limited by some of the things you can do, right? You can receive, you cannot transfer. Now, this is an open source device, or at least the firmware is open source, if not the hardware design. So you can do a lot with this outside of what is seemingly here, right? Yes, there is a USB-C, and that is data and power. So you are not actually limited by just the things that you yourself can find. Let me come in here. We're going to go down. I have downloaded a large library of IR remotes. Some of these are tested, some of these are not tested. I've found some of my own IR remotes and IR remotes around, but I found a whole library here, and I found that some of these work on various televisions already out of the box, and so that's really nice. You can add a whole bunch of functionality to this without ever having to touch something, because people have already kind of found and saved some of these. Again, it was in here in the sub gigahertz channel, right? So I can't send all of these doorbells or these garage door openers, and I can't send all of these everything here. I can send some of them, but you can't send all of them because the firmware knows that's illegal and that you're probably going to be doing something wrong with it. So I do, but you also you can find some very interesting things on the web, and I don't legally recommend that you use these against things that are not your own devices, but there are possibilities out there. There is also one other thing. So this device, right, has firmware in it. That's essentially the operating system is this firmware. And the question is, if it's locked, what can you do with this? And the reality is that you can flash whatever firmware you want on this, and there are already branches of people creating unlocked firmware. But we're all on the same page here in the sense that nobody has released like 1.0 firmware, because those are all still forks of the Flipper Zero firmware. Flipper Zero hasn't hit 1.0, so there's a lot of features still left to be implemented, and a lot of things that are actually kind of interesting, right? Like, I would have just bought this thing for the U2F, to be honest. Like, this is just like an overkill U2F in my mind. If you're talking about daily practical function, like, oh, cool. A YubiKey costs like half to maybe a third of these, because I got this for cheaper than you're probably going to be able to get it now. I think it's $150 for one of these, and a YubiKey might be like $50, $60, but then you have everything else too, right? There's also there's this plugin functionality, and this is going to be added more as time goes on, but you should be able to basically add software without having to flash the firmware. That's kind of the goal of that. And there are a lot of possibilities. There's possibilities with this device well beyond what's currently available with it. So if you think you're going to get this and get it out of the box and just go crazy and nuts, you might want to rethink your expectations for this device. In many senses, you're buying into development, especially since Flipper 2, or Flipper 1, I guess, because they're like, dorks, and so we're doing the like number from zero thing. But the Flipper 1 is supposed to have Wi-Fi, And so like you can get this, and you can get the Wi-Fi development board, so you can start working on how that Wi-Fi is going to work. But this device does not have Wi-Fi in it, and if that's something that's intriguing to you, then you might want to wait. What this can actually do in terms of Wi-Fi is probably going to be limited anyways, because this is a very small device with a very limited hardware. But that if that is important to you, you might want to hold off. And again, a lot of the implementations, like there's various versions and types of sub gigahertz or RFID. There's various types and brands, and they're adding more functionality for all that the hardware supports as time goes on. But you might find a lot of things just don't read right. When I first got this, I hadn't flashed the firmware, and even the IR reader, the infrared reader, was not working. So I had to flash the firmware to get the infrared, functionality. So there's still a lot to go with this, and it's not a magic tool to just let you do anything. It's going to take work. It's going to take some knowledge, and it's going to be fun, though, because, you're going to learn about some stuff that maybe you had no clue about before. And it's really cute. Look how cute that is. Look how just freaking adorable that is. It makes you feel like warm and fuzzy inside. But yeah, that's kind of my overall thought, is that this is a really cool device. It's really fun. The value is kind of there, especially considering if you were trying to build even just a single device out of this, right? If you're just trying to make an NFC reader, and emulator or something like that, you're probably going to spend a pretty reasonable penny on just one. But this has those 4 or 5 different readers and emulators, plus USB, so you can do the bad USB stuff, the U2F stuff, and it has Bluetooth. I don't know what kind of functionality that's going to have, because now with the pairing setup, maybe you might be able to spoof or something, but Bluetooth is primarily just for the app, the associated app. The associated app is nice. It can it has an Android app. I don't know if there is one for Apple products for iOS, but there's an Android app for it that can let you basically just flip your firmware. Now that's a new function, so you can actually change your firmware through Bluetooth now. I wouldn't necessarily do that because I don't love the flakiness of the connection in this. Sometimes I don't always have success with the Bluetooth and this device, so do that at your own risk. I still do it by USB because I just think it's more consistent, and I don't know. I just trust it better. So by USB, I do use it in Linux, and I use it on qFlipper. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but yeah, I use the qFlipper app image. But yeah, you do have to break out of the jail, or break out of the confinement, the sandbox of the app image, because it has to be able to touch the USB. So if you are using Linux, know that you do have to change some UDEV rules, and you are giving this thing added access to your system. This is an open source project. You can check everything else out to make sure that you're safe, but there's some questionable stuff in here, especially if you start installing third-party firmware, because again, Flipper Zero is a legit American company. They can only do so much nefarious stuff before they would get in trouble, but it's also open source, and those other ones are also open source, but they are not backed by Flipper. So use at your own risk. I just say that for safety. But yeah, overall though, this is a really interesting device, and I've played around with it a lot, and I've found not as many use cases for it as I wanted, but as I play around with it, hopefully I'll learn more. I've already learned a lot more about some of the various functionalities of it than I ever imagined, because I just didn't even know what 7 gigahertz was before acquiring this device. I really just bought it on a whim. So if you're not, that's kind of the perspective I'm trying to come from. If you're not super into this technology, you might get this and be like, I don't even know what to do with it. and you might not have much to do with it. So think about it. Think about what you're really going to do with this before you drop a $1.50 on it. Think about how functional it's going to be in your day-to-day life. But again, I mean, just as a U2F device, it works. It works only through USB right now. They might be doing Bluetooth at some point, but right now it's just USB U2F. But yeah, so I don't know. That's just kind of my thoughts on the Flipper Zero. Super cute, super nice, very fun concept. But they're still working through the implementation, and there's a lot of room for it to grow, and I'm excited to see it grow. So thanks for hanging out if you have so far, and see you in the future.